Hello, welcome to As We Get Older. My name is David Moore, and today's topic I'm going to talk about is death certificates. Let me first start by saying, once you get the death certificate of a loved one, it will probably be many days or even weeks after that loved one has passed on. Most people will get a copy of the death certificate from whatever funeral home or whatever service you have who has taken care of the body. So that might be from a place where you had the person cremated, or again, it might be from a funeral home. They're usually the person that would get you the certified copy of the death certificate. When you do look at that death certificate, you may not recognize the cause of death. For example, you may have known your loved one had lung cancer, but when you look at the cause of death on the death certificate, it might say something like acute respiratory failure, or it might say asphyxiation, or it might say a cardiac event, like a heart attack. That's because the very first diagnosis that goes on a death certificate is usually what caused that person's death in the moment. And oftentimes that's a respiratory or cardiac event. If you look further down the death certificate, you'll probably see the illnesses that you're more aware of. For instance, the other illnesses that contributed to the death, such as a lung cancer or another chronic illness that the person may have had. All right, getting that certified copy. When you get that certified copy of the death certificate, you may get actual paper copies, or you may get electronic copies that the funeral home may send you. They're going to be very important. Almost everybody will want a copy of that death certificate that you have to deal with. For example, getting the person's car that was perhaps titled in their name, titled into someone else's name, you'll need a copy of that death certificate. The bank will need a copy. Insurance policies will need a copy. If they had investments in a financial firm, they're going to need a copy. You're going to need more copies than you think you need. So what I would recommend is the funeral home will probably ask you how many copies you want. Again, if you're getting an electronic copy, that's not a big deal because you can send that out to many different people. But if you're getting actual paper copies, I'd probably recommend getting at least 5 to 10 because they can get them for you as part of their service. If you need them after that, let's say 3 months from now, you needed another copy, you're going to have to go to probate court physically and get that copy yourself. So that just takes more time. So if you get them all up front from your funeral home, then it's less of a burden later on. But again, just remember, you're going to need more copies of that death certificate than you actually thought you were going to need. It seems like everybody needs to see that before they're willing to do anything, such as retitle things or transfer accounts into other people's names. They're going to have that.
I'm Laura Ornduff, and I want to add just a couple things to all of David's wonderful information. The first, check for accuracy. I can't stress that one enough. Sometimes it may not matter, but most of the times it will matter if there's a problem or something needs to be changed. For example, my friend's mother's death certificate came back with a time of death that was 2 hours off of the actual time of death. Now, in her situation, she'd been sick for many years. She died in a hospital. There was no police involvement, no investigation. And the city, county, and state where her mother passed said, don't worry about it. As long as the date's correct, that's fine. That was fine in her situation. In my situation, when I got my mother's death certificates, the Social Security number was off by 1 digit. That was a deal breaker. So we had to go back and get new death certificates. Now, I had requested 12 death certificates. Now, if you're watching this video going, I don't know, it's okay, I can empathize. When the funeral director asked me how many I wanted, my first answer was 1. One for the records? I don't know. And they had to explain because all this information we're giving you in the video, I did not know sitting in front of the funeral director planning my mother's funeral. And so I ended up with 12. A lot of places were fine with digital, but there were still a few places, because we were dealing with some of her money, they wanted a hard copy. Now, a lot of places, if you're working face-to-face, they want to see it, feel it, touch it. A bank officer has to look at it, or a representative of the company has to look at it. And most of the times they would just take it in the back, make a copy, and give me back the original. They just needed someone who was employed by them to look at it. So after about a year, I still had 5 death certificates left. I thought, lesson learned, I got too many. Lesson learned. Now, as I was going through all this with moms, I was contacting Dad's retirement account and, Dad's information and just saying, okay, what do we have? What do I need to be prepared for with Dad's? And pretty much, like Mom had listed Dad as a primary beneficiary. Dad listed Mom as primary beneficiary and me as second. Okay. Everyone I spoke to said, don't worry about it. You don't need to change anything. A few people said I couldn't. Don't worry about it. Now, piece of information, if you've not watched some of the other videos, my father, before my mother died, unfortunately had Parkinson's dementia. And that I had actually become his power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney and power of attorney. And so I did a lot, financial stuff. I worked with Mom and we were working on this financial stuff. So when she kind of passed unexpectedly, I was still his power of attorney. And I was having to make this decision. So he could not change, and we did not change his beneficiaries. So Mom was first, I was second. No big deal. Life went on. 3.5 years later, Dad passes. So I go to contact these folks and say, hey, Dad's passed. And they're like, that's sorry for your loss. We need proof that your mother passed. So still have that 1 death certificate for records, but those other 4 spare, I used with Dad. So it's amazing how many you will need that you don't know you need. Now, again, only child. I was executor of both my parents' estates, so I basically had, for lack of a better way of explaining it, a business reason to have a death certificate. I did just some random Google hits in prepping for this video, and there's a lot of variance state to state, county to county, but there's some places where you can't just go in and get a death certificate. I don't know if there's any place that can. I don't know. But you can't just say, oh, the lady down the street died. Let me go get her death certificate. You actually have to have either, you're a relative, like a close relative. And there was one I was reading from a state from up north that it was like you had to be either a child. You couldn't be a cousin. You had to be a spouse, a child. It was very specific of what type of family member you had to be. So I would encourage you, first of all, if you can change your beneficiaries, if someone has passed, if you can, that would be the ideal. And I've got a whole video on beneficiaries. I encourage you to watch that. That's ideal. But if you can't, like in my situation, Dad's with dementia, I was his power of attorney. We just didn't. Or if you find yourself working with someone like a parent or, an older loved one that they just never changed it for whatever reason, you're going to have to get those death certificates, through probate office or the probate court, the registrar's office. I don't know what it would be in your county. I don't know. But it's something to be aware of that if there's somebody who's deceased and listed as a beneficiary, you're going to have that death certificate. So hopefully we've given you a few things to think about. I know death certificates is not something that a lot of people want to think about, but it is, it's part of the business of, when people pass. So please take a moment. Any questions you have, please contact your lawyer, ask your bank, talk to your lawyer, maybe even, your medical team. They may have some advice about they can offer. But again, ask these questions now, start having that conversation, check your beneficiaries. So hopefully I've given you a few things to think about. Please check out the videos in my library, and I'll see you in the next video.